In the early dawn of the atomic age, the world woke up to a new kind of fear, a fear that glowed in the dark, hummed in the wires, and echoed in the minds of every man, woman, and child. It was the fear of a button pressed too soon, the fear of a flash brighter than the sun. When the mushroom cloud rose over Hiroshima in 1945, it didn't just end a war. It began a new kind of world, a world balanced on a knife's edge, a world where peace was kept by the threat of total destruction. By the 1950s, America was learning how to live with that uneasy truth. The soldiers had returned from Europe and the Pacific, eager to build, to marry, to raise families. Suburbs sprang up like spring flowers. Children rode bikes down quiet streets. Radios played soft jazz, and the smooth voice of Eisenhower promised calm. But beneath the calm, the hum of fear persisted. In schoolhouses across the country, children were taught to duck and cover. Teachers' voices trembled slightly as they demonstrated how a wooden desk could shield them from atomic fire. Sirens were tested, fallout shelters were stocked, and somewhere in the distance the faint crackle of a test signal always lingered on the airwaves. The enemy, they said, could strike at any moment. In those years, propaganda became a kind of medicine, a way to manage the fear. Films told families what to do in case of an attack. Leaflets assured them that preparedness could mean survival. It was a strange kind of optimism, the idea that discipline and duct tape could keep the end of the world at bay. And Americans believed because they needed to. The Cold War wasn't just a military standoff, it was psychological. Every invention, every broadcast, every rumor became part of a larger theater. At its center stood the bomb, silent, waiting, all-powerful. The Soviet Union's first successful test in 1949 shattered America's monopoly on atomic power. The age of mutual fear had truly begun. Soon came the race, for rockets, for satellites, for the upper hand. The space race began as a way to look to the stars, but underneath it all was the same question. Who could strike first? And who would survive? In 1952, the United States detonated the first hydrogen bomb, a weapon 1,000 times more powerful than Hiroshima. The sky turned white, the sea boiled, and the world realized that we had gone beyond the point of imagination. Science had reached into the very fabric of the atom and torn it open. Television, new and eager, became the window through which this fear and fascination played out. Viewers saw mushroom clouds filmed in slow motion, men in dark goggles standing miles away as the desert floor erupted into daylight. The images were mesmerizing. The atomic test became a kind of ritual. Each explosion reassured Americans that they were still in control. But control, as it turned out, was an illusion. Inside government bunkers, plans were drawn for continuity of government. Secret tunnels, hidden rooms, and deep mountain shelters were carved from stone. The idea was simple. If the world above was destroyed, something of America would remain below. Even presidents rehearsed the apocalypse. Eisenhower was briefed on evacuation routes and shadow governments. Yet he, too, knew the truth, that in a true nuclear exchange, there would be no victory, only ashes. For ordinary citizens, life carried on. Television shows like Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best painted a portrait of perfect families. Laughter, dinner at 6, lawns neatly trimmed. It was comforting, perhaps intentionally so. Behind every smile, the nation's collective anxiety was quietly managed, edited out of the frame. The 1950s became an era of contradictions, prosperity and paranoia, faith and fear, optimism and oblivion. In laboratories, scientists were already imagining the next frontier. Computers, then the size of rooms, promised to think faster than any man. Automation was spreading through factories. Machines were learning to replace human labor, and in some ways to replace human judgment. It was here that early conversations about thinking machines began. If we could create bombs that thought, why not machines that reasoned? Artificial intelligence, once a philosopher's dream, began to take shape in the same universities that built the weapons of deterrence. The nuclear age had birthed the digital age. By mid-decade, the American home had become a strange blend of comfort and caution. Fallout shelters advertised alongside new refrigerators. Magazines ran ads for canned goods meant to last through a siege. Even toy companies joined in, selling miniature Geiger counters and atomic science kits for curious children. Fear had become familiar, something you could live with, decorate, even sell. Meanwhile, in Nevada, nuclear tests became public spectacles. Thousands gathered in Las Vegas hotels to watch the distant glow of detonations. They sipped cocktails as the sky lit up like dawn. Atomic tourism, they called it. The bomb had become entertainment. It was surreal, almost poetic, humanity finding beauty in its own destruction. As the decade wore on, the tension deepened. Korea, Berlin, Cuba, each new headline pulled the thread tighter. And always, the question remained, who would blink first? America began to dream of shelters not just for survival, but for continuity, to preserve civilization itself. Civil defense pamphlets advised on sanitation, food rations, and family morale in the aftermath of attack. It was the bureaucratization of fear, neat, organized, and heartbreakingly naive. Yet through all of it, life didn't stop. Children grew up, cities expanded, science soared, and somewhere in the hum of television static and factory noise, Americans began to normalize the unthinkable. The threat of annihilation became just another fact of life, like the weather or the traffic. People fell in love, went to work, and dreamed about the future, even a future that might not come. By the late 1950s, the doctrine of mutually assured destruction had taken hold. The logic was simple, brutal, and strangely elegant. If both sides could destroy each other completely, neither would dare to act. It was, paradoxically, peace through terror, and it worked. Or at least, it held. The world stood still, balanced on a delicate line between logic and madness. Looking back, it's easy to see the 1950s as a simpler time, milkshakes, jukeboxes, drive-ins. But beneath that pastel veneer lay one of the darkest psychological experiments in human history, teaching an entire civilization to live with extinction. In classrooms and kitchens, Americans learned to smile through uncertainty. The hum of refrigerators and televisions became the lullaby of a nervous age. Even as they built the future, they knew that it could all disappear in a heartbeat. And perhaps that's the deepest lesson of the atomic era, that fear, when shared, becomes a kind of unity, that in facing destruction together, humanity found a strange sort of peace, not in faith, not in weapons, but in endurance. The Cold War ended decades later, but the fear it forged never truly vanished. It lives on in our technology, in our headlines, in the quiet awareness that progress always comes with a shadow. We learned to live with the bomb, and in doing so, we learned something profound about ourselves. Because the Cold War wasn't only about missiles or nations, it was about the human heart, resilient, terrified, and determined to survive. And in that endless twilight between war and peace, we built not just weapons, but the modern world itself,